Good morning, everyone. We'll get started in just a minute once we have a chance for everyone to get logged in. As we're waiting, just an FYI that if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A panel and not the chat panel. We will have a Q&A section at the end of the presentation, and we'll be answering as many questions as we can. We'll get started in just about a minute. All right, so let's get started. So thank you all for attending. For those of you who just logged in, a reminder that we are going to be taking questions in the Q&A panel. So if you have questions as you go along, feel free to put them in the Q&A. We will generally respond to them at the end of the session when we'll have a Q&A, when we have a Q&A panel. Also, just as a reminder, this is not your only opportunity to have questions answered. The Financial Aid Office is available for questions. We'll have our contact information available through either our financial aid email address or by making an appointment with one of us in our staff. So today, my name is Michael Silvernail. I'm the Associate Director of Financial Aid here at the Harvard School of Public Health. I'm joined by Sinead, who is our Assistant Director. If you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sinead Moore, and like Michael said, I'm the Assistant Director of Financial Aid.
We also have moderating our Q&A, we have Chris Fincher. Say hi, Chris.
Hi there. Thanks for coming, everyone.
He is also in our financial aid office. He's a financial aid coordinator, and we will have Lizzie Anderson, who is here from the Office of Admissions. So thank you all for being here. So we'll jump right in. So the first question that a lot of people ask is, who is eligible to apply for scholarships and grants? So the eligible programs include the MPH programs that are in the residential programs, the Masters of Science programs that are in the residential programs, the Doctor in Public Health, the MPH Epi or MPH in Epidemiology, and the MPH Generalist program. Also, PhD students don't have to apply for financial aid, but will automatically receive financial aid by virtue of being admitted to the program. There are some programs that are not eligible to apply for scholarships and grants, unfortunately. These include the Masters in Healthcare Management and the summer-only or summer-focused Masters in Science and MPH degrees. Now, in order to be considered for financial aid, there are some really important dates you have to keep in mind. In early to mid-December, you're going to receive an email from the Financial Aid Office with instructions on how to submit your financial aid application. It's important to be aware that you won't be able to get that email until your application for admission has been submitted and it's complete. So do make sure you have that first. You're not going to get an email from us until such time as your actual application for admission has been received. But if you get to the middle of December and you still haven't received a financial aid application email from us, please make sure you check your junk mail folders, your spam folders to see if there is an email. If there isn't, contact our office at that point so we can investigate and send you the appropriate email. Because in order to complete that application, you do have to have your credentials, your application email, and instructions on how to complete that application. That application is due by January 8th. So you're going to have from around early to mid-December till January 8th to submit that application. We often get a question saying, do I have to apply for financial aid before I know if I'm being admitted? And the answer is yes. You do need to complete that application by January 8th in order to be considered, so you won't know whether or not you're being admitted at the time you submit the application. The application is not lengthy. It doesn't take a lot of time to complete, but do make sure that you do complete it by January 8th. Log back into the portal after you think you've submitted it, just to make sure that it's submitted successfully, because the only way you can be considered for scholarship assistance from the School of Public Health is by submitting that application. As I mentioned before, if you are applying to the PhD program, which is different from the DRPH program, The PhD program is done through the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences, and if you're admitted to that program, you'll automatically receive financial assistance. There's no separate application you need to submit. So when you're thinking about financial aid, you should also be thinking about the cost of attendance. Now, over on the right-hand side, you're going to see a slide, which is an example of what for 2022, 2023, so the current academic year, the MPH 45 program, what the cost of attendance is. So this is just an example and is not going to be the same cost you necessarily are going to be incurring in 2023, 2024. We don't have the new figures available yet. When we do, we will certainly publish it out on our website. But this can give you a rough example of what the costs are that you're going to incur. There's two sort of pieces to the cost you incur. There's your direct charges, which is your tuition and fees. That's going to be your tuition, your health insurance, and your health services fee. And then there's estimated living expenses. Now, when it comes to those estimated living expenses, they're going to vary person to person. So this is just an estimate. In order to get a better idea for your individual program of what the current tuition and fees costs are, we encourage you to go to the student budgeting tool, which will give you that estimate. We also have a link to information about housing, so you can start getting a sense of what your housing options might be and what your housing costs might be. I also want to bring your attention to our financial wellness program because it has information about student budgeting and information that you will find helpful when thinking about how to budget for your cost and what your total cost for the program might be. And then there's also a link here for your financial certification requirements for student visas. You should be aware that when it comes to financial certification requirements, the cost of your program isn't necessarily the full cost you're going to need to show resources for a visa, because you will also have to show that you have resources for dependents. And depending upon the length of your program, it may have additional costs incurred during the summer between the first and the second year. So bear in mind, there's a tool available that's on that financial certifications link that will give you the precise amount that you're going to need for your visas. But again, bear in mind, the costs that are currently in there are for the current academic year, not yet for the 2023-2024 academic year. So I mentioned that in addition to the direct costs, there are the individual costs you're going to have for living expenses. So here's just some rough estimates of how much we have found that students are incurring for their cost. So when you look at rent, that rent cost is based upon the idea that you're living with a roommate. So that's sort of half the cost of what a rent would be for an apartment. And food implies that you are eating most of your meals at home, personal expenses, etc. As I said, this is just an estimate. It may be possible for some people to live on less than this amount listed, but it may be that you may end up paying more than this. It all depends upon what you can find for housing, what your living expectations are. Our general rule of advice is you should do your very utmost to try to limit your expenses when at all possible. Some of that is in your control. So to the extent that you are able, we encourage you to try to live as modestly as you can. All right, so now we're going to talk a little bit about scholarship opportunities. First, there are some Harvard-wide scholarship application opportunities that are not through our office. Most financial aid opportunities are through our specific office, but there are a couple for international students which are specific to students from individual countries. For those, some of them do require a separate financial aid application. You'll find the information on that at the link we provided here. Most of them you'll have the opportunity to be automatically nominated through our office. So when you complete our financial aid application, you'll have the opportunity to answer various questions, which will help us identify individuals who might qualify for different types of opportunities. But there are a few, such as the Knox Fellowship, the Hong Kong Jockey Club Fellowship, and a few others that do require a separate application. There's one for a public service fellowship for students from Egypt. So do make sure you look at those because they may have, in addition to a separate application, they also may have different deadlines. So make sure you familiarize yourself with those opportunities if that's something for which you want to be considered. Be aware, however, in order to qualify for these Harvard-wide scholarships, you do have to be a full-time student, and typically students who are in the summer-focused or summer-only degree programs, Masters in Healthcare Management, and the MPH EPI program typically cannot qualify for these programs. There's also external scholarships available, and the external scholarships are funding from third-party sources. They may be from your individual countries, or it may be from organizations with whom you've worked. I have a link here that can give you information, takes you to information where we've listed some different resources. So we put together a funding database. This is a funding database of different opportunities that we've identified in the past, either that students have had in the past or that we've identified through research as promising opportunities. So we encourage you to look at these. It is important to start early. So start looking at these different opportunities as soon as you can to see if there's anything that might match. Also, look in your own communities, look in your own countries, see if there's different opportunities that you can identify in order to help with your funding situations. Then there's funding from the Harvard School of Public Health. So this is what you're going to be considered for by virtue of completing our financial aid application. And again, and I'm going to say this lots of times, the deadline to submit this is January 8th. Do make sure you submit the financial aid application, because that is the way you're going to be considered for this funding. As you look at this, you're going to notice that regretfully, because of limited resources, unfortunately, only a relatively modest percentage of our students do receive funding directly from the school. And it's going to vary substantially between programs. So as you see, we have different percentages of students who receive funding, and then we have some estimates of the average awards that students typically receive if they receive funding. So unfortunately, funding is limited. So not all students are going to receive funding, and those who do receive funding, it's typically only going to be a percentage of the tuition cost. It is not, there are very few opportunities, and I'd say it's vanishingly small for students who are fully funded to cover the full cost of attendance, unfortunately. So when you are thinking about your attendance and what opportunities exist, do be aware that you are going to have to look at combining funding from the school if you receive it with your own personal resources, potentially student loan borrowing, but that the school itself is typically not going to be able to provide funding that's going to cover the full amount of your cost to attend the program. All right, in addition to scholarship and grant opportunities, there is some information and some opportunities to borrow student loans, and there is the ability for students to work through student employment. So when it comes to loans, there are some private loan lenders who will loan to international students. Typically, you're not able to borrow the full cost of attendance with private loans. For example, the Harvard Credit Union, without a U.S. citizen cosigner, there is a limit of $25,000. There are higher limits available if you do have a U.S. citizen cosigner, but if you don't have one, typically the amount you can borrow is going to be less than your full cost of attendance. But it may be that borrowing through a lender like the credit union or some of the other lenders that will lend to international students in combination with your own personal resources and ideally some scholarship opportunities combined may be what's necessary to allow you to attend. So this may be a viable option for students, but we do certainly encourage students to try to borrow as modestly as possible. The last thing any of us want is for a student to take on so much debt that they don't feel like they can pursue the types of public good that they want to pursue. So to be very careful when it comes to debt. But if that is something that you're comfortable with, there are some options, and we have some links here where you can find more information about private loan borrowing. There may also be some lending opportunities available through your home country. So we certainly encourage you as well to look into any of those opportunities in addition to the information we have on our website. It is possible to work while a student at the Harvard School of Public Health. So when it comes to the sort of specific details, we certainly encourage you to contact the Harvard International Office, because they can give you sort of nuanced answers when it comes to what you can do and what you can't. But I can say that, for example, if you're on an F1 visa, you're limited to working a maximum of 20 hours a week, and it has to be on campus. If you have a different type of visa, you may have different type of work opportunities, but on an F1, it's a maximum of 20 hours a week. There are lots of students who do work, and it certainly is the type, something that can help you with your living expenses. You should be aware, however, that this is only it's going to help, but it's going to be relatively modest when it comes to helping you towards your total living expenses. They don't come with tuition waivers. So it's not like it comes with a paycheck plus a tuition waiver. Student employment is going to be just a paycheck. And that's great to help you with your living expenses, but there isn't the opportunity to turn it into something that's going to cover your tuition expenses. Now, here's a list of different resources that we want to draw your attention to. There's a student budgeting tool we mentioned before, the Harvard Financial Wellness Program through the Harvard University Employee Credit Union. Here's a link for more information about housing, financial certification, the Harvard International Office, and the links about private loan information. This information and these slides are going to be made available to you on the admissions website. So this is something that you can refer back to as a tool. Also, our financial aid website itself has a lot of useful information. You can see the link at the top. This is going to give you some more information about all the things we've talked about today, and we'll go into a great deal more detail. So we highly encourage you to take advantage of that link. Again, our deadline is January 8th, and we certainly encourage you to contact us after this session if you have additional questions. And when it comes to contact information, here you're going to see is our contact info. Typically, it's better to try to either email or schedule a meeting with us. Certainly, you can call us on the phone, but that's going to be a bit hit or miss when it comes to getting us because of our hybrid schedules. So we certainly encourage you to send an email either to our financial aid at hsph.harvard.edu email address, or you can schedule a meeting with us through our Calendly link. And we are very happy to try to answer any questions that you have. And with that, it's going to be now time for the Q&A portion of our presentation. So let me stop my share of this and we will start taking questions. All right, who wants to, what questions are first, either Chris or Sinead?
Yeah, so to start off, I did see a few questions in the chat about the presidential scholarship. I know you mentioned, Michael, that scholarship's very competitive, but would you be able to speak a bit more to what the scholarship committee looks for with regard to the presidential award?
Certainly. And overall, let me just first actually sort of preface that by saying when scholarship determinations are being made, they're being made based on a combination of merit, financial need, and socioeconomic diversity. So there's a number of different factors that go into all these considerations, including the presidential fellow. The presidential fellows, international students are eligible for presidential fellows just like domestic students. And the assessment is going to be made, again, based on a combination of merit and need. There's only a few different opportunities for those. So as I mentioned earlier, unfortunately, there's not a lot of opportunities that are going to cover the full cost of tuition and fees. But the presidential fellow, of which there is a modest number, is one of those that can cover the full cost of tuition fees, and in some cases, a small stipend towards living expenses as well. So there are some opportunities, but unfortunately, they're modest in number.
Great. Thanks, Michael. Yeah, I think that speaks to the competitiveness of that scholarship for sure.
Sure.
I did see another question in the chat about the MPH Generalist program and whether that was eligible for Harvard-wide scholarships.
No, unfortunately, it's not. As we listed on that slide, MPH Generalists typically are not eligible. It's not considered to be a full-time program. And in order to be eligible for the Harvard-wide fellowships, first it has to be, typically you have to be an in-person program and you have to be full-time.
Great, thank you. Let's see.
I'll just grab one because I see it. Does the Harvard Chan School offer fully funded scholarships? I sort of answered that already, but just to, explicitly say, it's some of the fellowships that are through these Harvard-wide fellowships do have full funding, but when it comes to funding that you apply to through the Harvard School of Public Health, typically there's not generally full funding. If by full funding you mean not only full tuition, but also cost of living. That typically is not available, unfortunately. Oh, there's a question here about DRPH. So let me jump in that. So it says, I hope you elaborate on financial aid for DRPH. So that is a very specific type of funding, and that's very straightforward. So if you complete the financial aid application and you demonstrate financial need, then for the first 2 years of the program, you'll receive a 50% tuition fellowship for the first 2 years of the program. After the first 2 years of the program, the tuition for that program drops to 50%. So the total net cost for the next year is the same as it was for the first 2 years, but you're only receiving scholarship assistance for that first 2 years. And it's always 50% of the tuition coverage, which you will receive as long as you demonstrate financial need. So unlike the other programs where we can't unfortunately predict for any individual whether or not they're likely to receive funding or not, if you do have financial need, then for the DRPH, it's a very specific type of funding that we have a commitment to.
Thanks, Michael. Would you mind going over if the financial aid application influences admissions decision in any way?
Very good question. It has absolutely no impact on your likelihood of being admitted. In fact, the admissions office does not know who has completed the financial aid application or not. So it will have no impact on your likelihood of admission.
Thank you. And a quick reminder that this session is being recorded and will be available on admissions website for later consumption. Another question about the MPH and clinical and effectiveness full-time and other options summer only. So is this does the full-time residential program qualify for a scholarship versus the summer only? I believe is where the question is getting into.
Yeah, and it's a good question. Yes, if you're in the residential program as opposed to the summer only program, you do qualify to apply for financial aid. So there are programs which start in the summer and they qualify. So if they start in the summer, but you are also attending in the residential program into the academic year, so it starts in the summer, but it continues through the academic year, those qualify. It's the programs which are summer only or the programs which are online that for the Masters in Healthcare Management, for example, doesn't qualify. And the MPH-EPI program does qualify, but the summer only programs where you're only enrolled during the summers, those are the ones, unfortunately, that don't qualify.
So I saw a few questions about combining scholarships. So students potentially applying for multiple scholarship awards, like institutional outside awards. And I thought that would be an interesting segue into talking about kind of the cost of attendance ceiling and how that influences the total financial aid that you're eligible to receive.
Sure. So it is possible to receive funding from multiple sources. And if you know about that funding up front, you should notify us as part of the financial aid application, because one of the questions some of the questions are going to ask about, are you receiving any external support and the amount, and is anyone helping you to pay for your educational costs? So those are taken into account, but certainly there are plenty of students who do receive some outside funding as well as some funding from the school. The total amount of funding you can receive can't exceed your cost of attendance. Now, that's typically not an issue for most students. Most students, unfortunately, are not lucky enough to be in a position where their total funding is going to exceed their total cost of attendance. But you can receive funding from multiple sources as long as the total doesn't exceed the cost of attendance. But bear in mind, however, you can't use $2 to cover, let's say, for example, you receive external funding that can only be used for tuition and fees. You receive a scholarship from us that can only be used for tuition and fees. That amount can't exceed tuition and fees if both sources limit the funding to just tuition and fees. So you can't one or the other has to be adjusted if that's such a case.
Thanks, Michael. This may be more of a question that Lizzie may assist with. But for someone who missed out an opportunity in applying for full funding with a deadline of early October, what is the chances of deferring their admissions upon being admitted?
We save the harder questions for you, Lizzie.
Sure. So there is an opportunity for students to apply for a deferral after being admitted. It is not guaranteed, so we really encourage applicants to apply for the admission cycle to which they intend to enroll. I don't know if Michael, you want to jump in on how financial aid works for deferrals, but just know you reach out to our office if you have any questions. And again, this would only be an opportunity for admitted students.
Sure. So if you are granted a deferral by the Office of Admission, you will have the opportunity to reapply for financial aid. But bear in mind, since only a relatively modest percentage of students receive financial aid, that doesn't necessarily mean if you do reapply, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to receive funding. Unfortunately, if you didn't receive funding one year, you may find yourself in the same situation in a subsequent year.
Thank you both.
I think we've answered this
Chris?
one. Is HSPH need blind? Yes,
Yeah.
we're blind. That means admissions is not affected by whether or not you apply for financial aid or not.
And I did see a couple questions about how students can demonstrate their financial need. I'm sure some of that information will be available on the application itself, but maybe we could speak a bit to it here.
Yeah, and that is based upon the information that's on the financial aid application. That's going to be questions that are going to be asking about your income, your assets, the types of support you have, any external funding. If you have family members that are providing support, there's a place for you to provide that other people are, what amount of additional support you're receiving. So it's that assessment of that information on our financial aid application that we're using to determine whether or not you have financial need.
Thanks, Michael. Would you elaborate a little bit about what type of funding PhD students get?
If you're admitted to the PhD program, they cover full tuition fees plus a living expense stipend that covers the full cost of attendance for the program. So that is something that's automatic as part of being admitted to the PhD program.
Thank you.
Sure.
And a tag team question. How much is required for a visa certification, and is there a specific period of time the funds must stay in their account?
That's very detailed. Do you want to take a stab, Lizzie, first, and I can add in, or vice versa?
Sure, I can start just to provide additional context. So any incoming international student who is enrolling in a full-time residential program must be on a student visa for any duration of time that the program is on campus. So that includes MPH and epidemiology students for the month of June. But the process for obtaining a visa really starts with the admissions office. So students are required to show that they have funds to cover the cost of attendance for their program. For one-year students, so that would be MPH 45 and SM 42.5 credit programs, students must show that they have funds for the 9 months of their program. If you are in a multi-year program, so SM 60, MPH 65, SM 80, DRPH, you would be required to show that you have adequate funds to cover 12 months. So the cost of attendance for your program and then the summer living expenses as well. This past year, students were required to show about $90,000 to $100,000 depending on the program. Again, that would be for student only. Students would be required to show additional funds if you are bringing dependents. We do have, this is maybe just going too far into detail, but we do have very strict requirements here at the Harvard Chan School. So I'd like to let students know that so that they can budget and prepare. But we do accept multiple sources of funding, including scholarships, loans for the financial certification process, as well as personal funds. And if you are someone who is using personal funds to certify, we do require that funds are held in a US bank or a bank with a branch in the US, in US dollars and in the student's name. I know that was a lot of information. I'm happy to answer any follow-up questions. And Michael, tonight, Chris, feel free to jump in too.
Sure. No, I thought you covered it completely. So yes. So thank you. There's a question about what types of merit do you look for in candidates. That's a decision that's made through the admissions office and the programs, which are the departments when they're assessing your application for admission. So the same factors that are being used to assess your admission are being used for determining merit.
I see a question in here around working on campus. So that may, the specific question is about becoming a research fellow, but might be a good segue into talking about like federal work study opportunities and on-campus employment opportunities for students.
Well, there's no federal work study opportunities for international students because federal work study is just for US citizens, unfortunately. There are students who work on campus. As I mentioned earlier, students can work up to 20 hours a week on campus, and there are students who work as teaching fellows, research assistants, etc. These are student employment positions, however. It's not employment, it's not full-time employment with the university. Full-time employment with the university is entirely different. There are some people who attend the program part-time who are working for the university, but I can't speak to your eligibility for that. That's something you'd really have to be looking into for employment opportunities with Harvard if you're looking for full-time employment. But part-time employment is a maximum of 20 hours a week while you're on an F1 visa. If you're not on an F1 visa, if you're on a different type of visa, we highly encourage you to contact the Harvard International Office to research what your work opportunities are, because it can vary depending upon your specific visa.
Great. And staying in that international student mode, I did see a question here. If someone is from a high income country, does this affect the financial aid decision negatively as compared to folks from low to middle income countries?
I would flip that around when it comes to characterization, meaning one of the factors we look at, so we're looking at merit, need, and socioeconomic diversity. The socioeconomic diversity we're looking at is sort of looking at the overall strength of opportunity that a candidate may have had to amass resources over time, either from family support or from personal opportunities. And as part of that assessment, we do look at students who are from developing countries, which may have low income or low GDP. So that is a factor that is assessed as part of our overall consideration for financial aid. So that's sort of a background factor. When it comes to sort of assessing an individual applicant's financial need, we are looking at their personal income and assets and any resources that they have from outside sources to assist them with their program. So those are slightly two different buckets we're looking at.
Thank you, Michael. Similar to the previous question asked and some others that are in the Q&A, is questions about what is the approximate salary or hour for research or clinical assistant with an F1 visa. I did share a link in the chat for teaching fellows and research assistants in terms of what the pay guidelines are and the opportunities in where you can go to look for those, and the connections that you'll have to make with each department administrators to find opportunities. But as far as how the visa status influences employment, I believe Michael has addressed that earlier, unless you need to share that again.
I'll reiterate, just go to the Harvard International Office. If you Google Harvard International Office, it will come up, and research it there, because it's going to be very specific for different types of visa statuses. And I defer to them when it comes to the specifics.
Thank you. And I believe there's a question about what the financial certification for visa certification looks like for a fully funded PhD student.
Well, then it's very straightforward. Basically, when you'll provide a copy, you'll get a letter from the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences, which will detail the funding that is being provided, and you just need to provide that. The only time you'd have to then demonstrate additional funding is if you also had dependents, in which case you do have to, the funding is not going to cover your dependent costs, and therefore you would have to demonstrate that you have the funding available to cover those additional expenses, and you would then submit that as part of your visa certification process through the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences. But generally, it's just a copy of the letter you receive saying, here's the funding you're receiving.
Thank you. And I think just one last question about assistantship and teaching fellowships for an MPH 45, if that means it waives full tuition.
No, as I mentioned earlier, any kind of student employment you're doing, whether it's a teaching assistant, teaching fellow, etc., comes with a paycheck. It doesn't come with any kind of tuition waiver. Unfortunately, we don't have those opportunities available.
So I see a question around whether or not there's a separate essay for our financial aid application. So I was wondering if you could speak to that a little bit further.
Sure. There's no required essay separate from the financial aid application. There is an optional essay that students can complete that's called where you can provide well, there's two different pieces. One is there's an essay that's on adversity and disadvantage. If you have had extenuating circumstances where you've overcome adversity and disadvantage, because there's a specific fellowship for which students can be considered based upon that factors. Now, it's a university-wide fellowship, and there's only one recipient per year typically, and so it's not the kind of thing that unfortunately is often received by students at the School of Public Health, but there is that opportunity, and so we do ask a question about overcoming adversity and disadvantage. We also have, as part of the financial aid application, a separate section, which is a student explanation section, where if you have any unusual or extenuating circumstances that you don't feel are fully captured as part of your specific financial aid details, you can provide that explanation as part of your financial aid application.
Great, thanks, Michael.
Sure.
And following along that line around sort of more niche scholarships or more specific scholarships that students can be considered for, I do see a question about the Jorge Paulo Lehman Fellowship for students applying from Brazil, and whether that scholarship will be offered for 2022-23.
I can't speak to the details on that at this point. You might want to go to the Committee on General Scholarships webpage where we provided a link before. Sinead, did you have something you wanted to add there?
No, it was just like currently it's not out there. And the link is broken from CGS.
Yeah, so
Side of it.
unfortunately, I can't opine on whether or not it's being offered this year or not, or next year or not. So unfortunately, I just don't know.
Thank you, Michael. There is one more question about assistantship and teaching. How do
Sure.
students apply? And again, I think the link that's shared in the chat will provide more information on
Yeah.
the type of positions that are offered, the pay rates, and how you can go about making these connections within your department, and looking for any positions that may be posted or based on the faculty that you're interested in working with.
Right.
And exploring those options.
And sort of the takeaway here is that process isn't done through our office. So it's not something you're applying for through the financial aid office. It is something where you can pursue this as an employment opportunity, and we certainly encourage it because it can help with living expenses. But as we said before, it doesn't come with a tuition waiver. So it's a paycheck that you receive, not a tuition waiver. I see there's another question again about the presidential scholarship. There is no separate application for that. We're looking at the same factors for the presidential scholars that we're looking for other types of scholarships. We're looking at a combination of merit, need, and socioeconomic diversity.
Oh, I was able to find the application, so I'll put it in the chat for the Brazilian scholarship through CGS.
Ah, great. So apparently we were able to find it. We'll let CGS know about their broken link so that they can fix it. So thank you for drawing that to our attention. All right, we have a few more minutes here, so we are happy to answer any additional questions people have. Though again, as we mentioned earlier, this isn't your only opportunity to ask questions. You can certainly always email us at financialaid@hsph.harvard.edu, or you can make an appointment with us. If you do make an appointment with us, however, I do caution you, there are some questions we just aren't going to be in the position to answer. So we sometimes get people who contact us and ask us, what is my personal likelihood of receiving funding, and what amount of funding might I receive? Other than the information we've already provided, unfortunately, we can't assess for individuals their likelihood of receiving funding. The only way you're going to be able to know if you're going to receive funding is to complete the financial aid application, and then we will be considered when we consider financial aid for all students. We're not going to be able to give you an individual answer about your likelihood individually of receiving funding. There's a question about the chance of receiving scholarship for reapplicants. You have the same chance as an incoming applicant the first year. You're going to submit a new financial aid application, and you'll be reconsidered along with the next incoming class. There's a question about when we'll know whether or not a student whether or not you'll know if you receive funding. We try to release financial aid decisions at the same time that admissions decisions are released so that the information is available simultaneously. So ideally, you'll find out about financial aid opportunities at the same time you'll find out about whether or not you've been admitted.
Thanks, Michael. There's a question I think you and Lizzie could speak to. If a student has a full minimum amount in a bank statement and they have evidence of receiving funds in the future, such as employment, can they receive a visa form from Harvard based on future funding?
I'll jump in here. That's a great question. Unfortunately, no. If you are certifying with personal funds, all of the funds must be available in a cash account. And it's the expectation that the funds will remain available for the purposes of paying for the cost of attendance. So you would need to wait until you have all of the funds and are able to show that in your bank statement before we're able to issue your I-20. Hope that helps answer that. I see a follow-up question. If the full amount must be in a bank account or in assets as in a house or real estate, and again, the funds must be held in a cash account and immediately available for the purposes of the cost of attendance.
I see there's a question about for students who are in the MPH Generalist program, is there an opportunity for financial aid? There is. You can apply for financial aid for the MPH Generalist program. Whether or not you receive it is going to be based upon a combination, is again about merit and need. So it depends upon what kind of financial need you may have. So if you're working full-time and you have a significant salary, then the chances are obviously going to go down. If you're working during a residency and you have a modest income, then you may be able to demonstrate financial need, and therefore you can be considered potentially for some scholarship assistance. There's a question that says a loan approved for the same amount will work just as much, right? I think that what that means is, if you get a loan that is approved that covers the full amount of the cost, is that sufficient? Yes. If it's a student educational loan and the amount that you're approved for is sufficient to cover the amount you need for your visa, that works the same as personal funding. So that is true. Now, again, though, be careful. Don't borrow more than you are able to repay. You don't want to find yourself in a situation where you take out more debt than you can reasonably expect to repay. So do be conservative when you're thinking about whether or not it makes sense for you to borrow or not. There's a question about housing that says, is university accommodation likely to be the most budget-friendly option in Boston? How likely are incoming students to secure university accommodation? You may be able to find some Harvard housing, which is modest in cost, but in general, Harvard housing is at market rate. It's not typically charged at under market cost. So while certainly there's a lot of convenience from living in Harvard University housing when it comes to being close, when it comes to potentially not having to make a large down payment for first month's, last month's costs, when it comes to having costs like sort of, utilities and internet built in, it isn't necessarily less expensive. So you may be able to find less expensive housing in the Boston community. You just have to sort of assess and weigh the difference between convenience versus cost. And so certainly we want you to do as much as possible to focus on the cost side, but we wouldn't want you to live so far away from campus where it becomes so inconvenient in order to attend class. So you do have to balance those factors when it comes to the opportunities. There are students, I can't really speak to the likelihood of receiving housing. Luke Sutherland in the Office of Student Services is a great resource. And if you go to the link that we provided before for housing, there's information available about housing opportunities for students. And there will be a contact us link there where you can reach out to ask additional questions, and they'd be happy to discuss sort of the likelihood of housing, but there is housing available for students from the School of Public Health. There's a question about, with most loan providers providing a limited amount without a cosigner, what's the average amount of financial aid package? We sort of spoke about that earlier. Now, first, the Harvard Credit Union allows for up to $25,000 per year now without a U.S. citizen cosigner. But then that's separate from and independent of whether or not the likelihood of receiving scholarship assistance from the school. Those aren't, we don't combine them when we're making our assessment. When it comes to scholarship assessment, I provided information earlier on in the presentation. When it comes to the likelihood, it ranges between approximately 30% to 40% typically of students receiving some funding. And those students who do receive some funding, it typically varies between about 25% to 50% of tuition. So the amounts are going to vary. And it's frequently the case that the amount of funding that the school can provide, combined with any loan funding that you might receive, is not going to be enough by itself to cover your full cost of attendance, and that you are going to have to provide personal funding in addition in order to have enough funds to pay for the program. So that is a reality. We wish we had more scholarship resources we could offer, and we certainly are always investigating, looking for new donors and new opportunities to increase the funding we provide. But unfortunately, our funding is limited.
Do you mind if I jump in? I see there's a question about deferral again.
Sure.
Sure. So we talked about deferrals earlier, and for admitted students who intend to enroll, I mentioned that there is a deferral application process and that deferrals are not guaranteed. Somebody asked, can I defer my acceptance in case I'm unable to pay tuition immediately? And I should have added to my previous response that while deferrals are not guaranteed, historically, deferrals for requests for purely financial reasons have typically not been approved. So that is just something to keep in mind as you think about the appropriate application cycle that you wish to apply for.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, Lizzie, but typically reasons for deferrals that might be considered are ones where it's extenuating circumstances of which the applicant was not aware at the time they applied for admission initially.
Yes, thank you for adding, correct.
The next question I think might be something for you, Lizzie, as well. I think that I'll just quickly do the answer, what I think is the answer, which is no. If you can't sort of have an application just sort of kept live for consideration in a future year, you have to apply independently for admission each year. So that's something which would have to be done separately.
Correct. You would have to reapply, and there are no piece would carry over. So you'd have to submit a brand new SOFIS application.
All right. Well, I think we pretty much answered most of the questions today. But again, if you do have additional questions, we always do encourage you to reach out to us, and we're happy to answer questions. Oh, there's one last question. I don't, as far as I know, I mean, I think that's a admissions question, but no, you're considered independently each year, so that wouldn't affect your likelihood of being admitted. But with that going, please do reach out to us with any financial aid questions to financialaid@hsph.harvard.edu, or make an appointment with us. And we really look forward to talking more with you and hopefully having you join us as part of our community for the 23-24 academic year. So thank you and have a good day.